One of the biggest empires in history, the British Empire ruled over enormous portions of the planet at its height. Remarkably, Stuart Laycock's book, All the Countries We Have Ever Invaded, popularized the idea that Britain had invaded about 90% of all countries in the world at some point. In this video, we will explore how England managed to invade 90% of the world. Number 7. Expansion of the British Empire. Driven by a combination of exploration, trade, and conquest, the British Empire expanded gradually from the late 16th century through the 20th century. With the founding of early settlements like Jamestown in 1607, the British had a permanent presence in North America. Originally, their overseas efforts have been directed towards building trade routes and colonies in the Americas, especially during the Scramble for Africa. When European powers fought for control of territories on the continent, the empire grew quickly in the 19th century. By 1914, Britain ruled over a huge area that included many islands in the Caribbean and the Pacific, Australia, Canada, India, and large portions of Africa. This expansion was frequently supported by the idea that British culture was superior and by the civilizing mission, which held that it was Britain's responsibility to advance and enlighten less civilized countries. Britain benefited greatly from the empire's size, which made it a dominant force in world politics, trade, and cross-cultural interactions in addition to giving it an abundance of wealth and resources. Number 6. Naval power. As a force to defend trade and a vehicle for military conquest, the Royal Navy played a critical role in establishing and upholding British imperial dominance. Britain had secured its colonies and gained control over important maritime trade routes by the late 1700s thanks to the development of a strong naval fleet that outmatched that of its rivals in Europe. Britain was able to launch military campaigns to seize territories and defend its merchant vessels from foreign threats and piracy thanks to the Navy's ability to project power across the globe. Notable naval triumphs like the 1805 Battle of Trafalgar guaranteed British naval superiority and discouraged rival nations like France and Spain from interfering with British interests. The construction of naval bases around the globe, notably in the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and the Caribbean, allowed for the quick deployment of troops and the provision of logistical support for military operations. The Royal Navy is a vital part of British imperial policy and a source of pride for the country because of this naval strategy, which not only allowed for territorial expansion but also guaranteed the defense of British interests abroad. Number 5. Colonial strategy. Britain combined military force and diplomatic scheming in its colonial strategy, which was marked by a practical and frequently brutal approach. In many cases, the British formed alliances with particular factions to weaken their rivals when they invaded areas with weak or divided local powers. For example, the British East India Company began as a commercial enterprise in India and progressively extended its power through treaties and military conquests, resulting in direct British rule following the Indian Rebellion of 1857. British influence could be maintained without the costs of direct governance by using local rulers as puppets. This strategy frequently resulted in an indirect rule system that upheld local customs while imposing British authority. Britain used similar strategies in Africa, where it took advantage of tribal divisions to seize control of large areas of land. In order to gain cooperation, the British also used divide and conquer tactics, obtaining the support of local elites and offering financial incentives. A complex colonial administration that balanced local governance with British oversight was made possible by Britain's opportunistic and adaptable strategy, which also allowed it to expand its empire with relative efficiency and frequently without the need for large standing armies. Number 4. Industrial Revolution. Beginning in the late 18th century in Britain, the Industrial Revolution was a revolutionary era that greatly increased the nation's potential for imperial expansion. Significant technological advancements in manufacturing, transportation, and communication brought about by this revolution drastically changed the nature of the economy. The transportation of troops and goods was transformed by the development of steam-powered ships and railroads, which made resource extraction and military campaigns faster and more effective. The British military was now able to quickly send troops to far-off colonies, solidifying its hold on recently gained lands. Furthermore, the British forces possessed a significant edge in battles against less developed countries due to technological advancements in weaponry, including machine guns, advanced naval technologies, and rifled artillery. As a result of the industrial economy and the growing demand for raw materials, Britain continued to colonize in an effort to gain access to resources like minerals, cotton, and rubber. Because the wealth from its colonies fueled further industrial growth, the synergy between industrialization and imperialism allowed Britain to maintain its dominance over the world and to sustain its empire. Number 3. Economic motivation. British imperialism was primarily driven by economic reasons, which also led to the creation of colonies and the empire's growth. A major driver of colonization was the search for new markets for the sale of British-made goods, especially in the 19th century, when industrial production was at an all-time high. Often, at the expense of local economies, Britain created global trade networks in an attempt to find new markets for its products. After all, colonies were thought to be rich sources of agricultural products and raw materials for British industries. Plantations and resource extraction are two examples of exploitative economic systems that the British instituted in order to increase profits. An example of this type of economic exploitation is the opium trade in China, wherein Britain traded opium for tea, silk, and porcelain, causing China to suffer grave social and economic repercussions. The colony's continued economic dependence on Britain was also guaranteed by the application of tariffs and trade restrictions, which strengthened the empire's hold over them. In addition to providing justification for imperial expansion, this economic imperative influenced colonial policies and governance frameworks, frequently placing British economic interests ahead of regional welfare and advancement. Number 2. Broad definition of invasion. The claim that Britain invaded 90% of the world's nations is predicated on an expansive and somewhat contentious interpretation of the term invasion. A broad variety of military operations are covered by this definition, such as formal invasions, small-scale skirmishes, naval blockades, and even diplomatic interventions. For instance, this statistic includes a large number of nations that had British military presence, such as those engaged in World War II or the Napoleonic Wars, irrespective of the scope or significance of the military operations. The story is made more complex by the employment of mercenaries and privateers in the Americas and the Caribbean, which was frequently approved by the British government. Due to this broad definition of military presence, many countries are considered to have been invaded, regardless of their historical ties to Britain. Therefore, even though the number might draw attention to Britain's wide-ranging military involvements, it should be used with caution because it may not accurately capture the scope or importance of those exchanges. Important questions concerning the nature of imperialism and the differing levels of influence and control that Britain exercises over various regions are brought up by this broad definition. Number 1. Historical legacy. British colonialism left behind a significant historical legacy that still has an impact on modern global politics, culture, and economics. Economic inequalities, unstable political systems, and social divisions that were frequently made worse by colonial policies are among the many negative effects of colonial rule that many former colonies still contend with. Many nations have been permanently impacted by the imposition of British legal systems, educational frameworks, and languages which have shaped their governance and cultural identities. In many different parts of the world, communities are attempting to reclaim their histories and address a historical injustice, which has sparked movements for decolonization and reparations as a result of the legacies of exploitation and cultural absorption. Knowing this history is essential to understanding the dynamics of the modern world, since many countries are still attempting to achieve autonomy, justice, and identity while navigating the complex legacy of their colonial pasts. The ongoing discussions regarding cultural heritage, reparations, and the effects of colonialism highlight how crucial it is to critically evaluate the historical narratives that have shaped our perception of the modern world. These points offer a comprehensive and detailed knowledge of the various aspects that went into making Britain so powerful and influential in the world. If you liked our video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel.